الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله لا إله إلا الله علي ولي الله.
I'll give you one example. One example. This is about the belief in Allah. There is a professor of theoretical physics. His name is Lawrence Krauss. Krauss. He has written a book. The title of his book is A Universe from Nothing. A Universe from Nothing. It's a bestseller. So many copies have been sold of this book. And people have been reading it and saying, oh, this is so good. So the universe made itself by itself. Universe from nothing. Okay? And one of the big people, Richard Dawkins, he's commented on this book. Richard Dawkins has commented on this book. He says, this is a great book. Okay. Let's take a look at this book. Now, people think this is a professor of physics, so he really knows what he's talking about. And so therefore it's sold many copies, and people take his words وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ as dogma. خلاص, whatever he says, خلاص, this is had to be the truth. Let's take a look for a second here, brothers and sisters. So, on page 149 of this book, listen to what he says. He says, first, I want to be clear about what kind of nothing I am discussing at the moment. So when you say a universe from nothing, what is nothing? So he wants to be clear. This is what page? Page 149. So 149 pages, and you still don't know what is nothing. So after 149 pages, now he's going to tell you what is nothing. So let's see. First, I want to be clear. You know what's interesting? He says, first, I want to be clear. On page 149. I want to be clear about what kind of nothing I am discussing at the moment. This is the simplest version of nothing. What is the simplest version of nothing? Namely, empty space. For the moment, I will assume space exists with nothing at all in it, and that the laws of physics also exist. Does that sound like nothing to you? Let me repeat this one more time, guys. Pay attention to what he's saying. This is the simplest version of nothing, namely empty space. For the moment, I will assume space exists with nothing at all in it, and that the laws of physics also exist. So if they exist, is that nothing? The laws of physics exist. The universe exists. So what have you left? What is left there? He says, oh, but it's empty. There is nothing yet. That doesn't sound like nothing to me. On page 170, the author says, same person, the professor, does this prove that our universe arose from nothing? Of course not. But it does take us one rather large step closer to the possibility of such a scenario. Yani after presenting all his arguments, does it really say that it's nothing? He says, of course not. But it does take us one large step towards it. Did you hear this? Now, people have been reading this book, and Richard Dawkins says, this is an amazing book. Now, people have no argument that this universe was created. No, it's made of nothing. Interestingly, there is another researcher. His name is Kelly James Clark. Kelly James Clark. He wrote a book called Religion and the Sciences of Origins. Okay? On page 195 of this book, this is now a different one, Kelly James Clark. He is a research fellow at Grand Valley State University. What does he say on page 195 of his book? He says, Krauss's definition of nothing, he's referring to this Krauss, this guy, transforms into something. He says nothing, but it transforms into what? Something. He says, again, now interesting, listen to this. Again, he's free to define words as he likes. But it sure seems like he's cheating. A paragraph after he calls space empty, which recall he defines as a boiling, bubbling brew of virtual particles and fields widely fluctuating magnitude, he calls it otherwise empty space. So, empty space, it's actually a boiling, bubbling brew of virtual particles. So then, in the next paragraph, he says the universe results from these quantum fluctuations in what is essentially nothing. How is that nothing? So you see, another researcher, he says people are, in another part of his book, he says it's a free country. People can say whatever they want. He says, but sure, it sounds like something in here. He says he should have called his book A Universe from Something, not A Universe from Nothing. That's a better title for what he's written. Then what he says, what he writes, this guy, Kelly James Clark, on page 205 and 206 of his book. Listen to this, brothers and sisters. This one I want you to pay attention to. He quotes another theoretical physics. His name is Frank Tipler. He calls him, he's one of the first and best physicists of fine tuning. There's a theory called fine tuning. He wrote the following. Frank Tipler wrote the following. Listen to what Frank Tipler said. He's a theoretical physicist of fine tuning, some concept. What does he say? When I began my career as a cosmologist, studies cosmology, some 20 years ago, I was a convinced atheist. Well, there is nothing. I never in my wildest dreams imagined that one day I would be writing a book purporting to show that the central claims of Judeo-Christian theology are in fact true. I have been forced into these conclusions by the inexorable logic of my own special branch of physics. My own research forced me to believe that there is a creator of this universe. I would have never thought of. He was an atheist. He says, I was an atheist. I never thought of this. But you see, brothers and sisters, people now read Lawrence Krauss's book and they say, oh, well, universe from nothing. Why? Because he's a professor of physics. He knows what he's talking about. So what? Interestingly, this reminds me of Richard Dawkins himself. About 10 years ago, he was interviewed. And the interviewer asked him, he said, on a scale from 0 to 7, where 0, you're absolute believer in God. 7, you're a complete disbeliever in God. Where would you rank yourself? He said 6.9. So the interviewer was intrigued by the answer. He said, why not 7? After all these books that you've written. Just as a side note, I have come across people, unfortunately, some of the youth who've read the book of Richard Dawkins and they've decided not to follow the Sirat al-Mustaqim anymore. They don't believe in God anymore. And when I tell them why, we discuss with them, oh, Richard Dawkins said this and he wrote this and that other professor said this and this. So what? You have a lot of people writing things. But you hear what they write, what kind of things they say? It sounds so nice and rosy on the outside. Read what they say on the inside. And then you'll realize it's a fallacy, but it's a nicely written fallacy, presented as a reality. So I go back. Richard Dawkins, they said on that scale from 0 to 7, 7 you completely disbelieve in God. Where would you rank yourself? He said 6.9. So the interviewer said, after all these books, why 6.9? He said, because I cannot conclusively prove that there is no God. I cannot conclusively say it. Can you see that? So all these books he's written and all those people, they're best-selling books. Millions of copies have been sold globally. and people have read them and they've been influenced by them and وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ been deviated. It's all on the basis of suspicion. He suspects, doubt. And that's what Quran says, إِنَّ الظَّنَّ لَا يُغْنِي مِنَ الْحَقِّ شَيْئًا. One doubt does not change the certainty, the truth. There's truth. You see that? وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. Quran said it 1400 years ago.